Hey everyone, it's Professor Paul Laursen here, and I'm stoked to be on the Performance Podcast show. And yeah, we're going to talk all about Athletica AI and artificial intelligence. And I don't want you to be scared. I want you to get in there and listen and learn.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, episode 329, proudly brought to you by Polar's stunning new generation watches, the Polar Pacer and the Polar Pacer Pro. I'm Brad Beer, sports and exercise physiotherapist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. Of course, we do this across a range of our different episodes, interest editions, learn-ins catch-up episodes, coaches' corners, featured performers, and of course, our very popular expert editions. And today you are in for a real treat as we share a conversation with Paul Laursen, PhD, author, endurance coach, and high-performance consultant and entrepreneur. Now, the theme of today's conversation is exploring artificial intelligence and its role in the world of sports, training, coaching, and prescription. Paul Laursen is very widely known in the endurance sporting community for his contributions to the field. Paul served as the former lead of physiology for New Zealand Olympic athletes and the adjunct professor of exercise physiology at Auckland University of Technology. Paul is a world-renowned specialist in high-intensity interval training, low-carb diets, ketosis, heart rate variability, thermal physiology, health, and artificial intelligence. Paul has published over 150 scientific manuscripts, with his work cited in more than 15,000 publications. Paul is also an avid and active athlete himself, having competed in 17 Ironman triathlons while relishing the art of coaching both professional and age group athletes. Paul is the co-author of the HIIT science training book, High Intensity Interval Training, The Science and Application, with co-author and colleague Martin Buchheit. That book is widely used and referenced amongst the endurance sporting community by practitioners, coaches, and athletes alike. One of those including Dual Olympic Triathlon champion and former guest of the show, Alistair Brownlee, who, as you'll hear today, became involved with Paul's co-founded training platform, Athletica, off the back of reading that book. It's quite a story. So alongside HIIT Science, which has a huge following in the endurance community, including the recently launched Training Science podcast, Paul and his team for the past 8 years plus have been head down developing Athletica, a training platform utilizing artificial intelligence. And that is the focus of today's conversation. How can artificial intelligence be used to leverage coaching decisions and exercise prescription? Now, heads up, this is not a paid advertorial for Athletica. Rather, this is a conversation exploring how artificial intelligence already is and will continue to play a part in exercise prescription in the coming decades. So get your pen and paper ready. Here is my conversation with Paul Laursen, PhD, co-founder of Athletica and HIIT Science. Paul Laursen, welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Hey, Brad, thanks for having me. That was well pronounced, bro.
We were, prior to pressing record, I was just questioning the right pronunciation of the surname, and I cannot put the Scandinavian twist on it, but you might be able to. How do we roll that off the tongue?
You nailed it. Laursen.
Beautiful. Paul, this is really exciting to feature you on this expert edition of the Physical Performance Show. When we made contact, we were looking at several topics that we could explore, your expertise across so many different things, but we settled today with an exploration as a mini theme of endurance innovation or endurance innovators on this concept of artificial intelligence in coaching, which as a junior triathlete of the 90s, If I had have heard those phrases together, I would have been like, what on earth is this? So can you let us in a little bit on what this term means and how and why you're spending a lot of time and expertise looking at this?
Yeah. Well, Brad, it really stems back from, I also was a triathlete in the 80s too. And 1989, I think I started, but it was like, one of the things, man, I don't know if you remember, but it was like, we were following Ironman at the time, and it was Paulie Kuru. He was wearing like a polar heart rate monitor. Do you remember that?
I remember Paulie. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just, for whatever reason, I just thought it was kind of fascinating how the guy was using a heart rate monitor to optimize his performance. And so I just, even from that young age, I was just kind of mesmerized by how we could potentially use technology to better our performance and optimize training. So really, like, that's sort of my love started from that. And, I've been involved in this area for 30 years, from being a professor to, trying to, I guess, going and being an entrepreneur in it. But I guess, fast track 30 years from Paulie's days and we really kind of go, we're going exponential on the whole area of the buzzword is artificial intelligence, but it's using all of this information and this data from our wearables to give kind of insight in how we can optimize that training prescription. And again, I was trying to be Paulie Kuru. I was trying to be Dave Scott, Mark Allen. That was those are the things that kind of caught my interest. That's really just where I remember back from my own training days, and you'd be familiar with this. It's like, what is the best session to do today to give me the best outcome tomorrow? And that's the question that we always try to answer, whether it's with my business in HIIT science or whether it's with Athletica, the AI program that we're building. It's trying to help people with that question. What's the best training to do today? And machines can help us with that decision.
So that's a little bit of context to your interest. You have made that transition from academic expert, professor, the prof, as so many people in the endurance world affectionately refer to you as, to well-established, obviously in-demand coach, to now looking at leveraging this technology or leveraging Athletica, I guess, or artificial intelligence to I guess, go further. Is it just about sort of democratizing the expertise, or is it more about optimizing what a one-on-one coach could do, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, well said. I think, good question, because it really is. It has to be a hybrid sort of situation. There's many businesses out there that are just kind of throwing AI at the problem, and they're hitting their head against the wall when they realize that's just not the way it's going to work. You've got to involve the coach. You've got to involve the athlete. You've got to have a structure, and you can only use the tools to optimize for the problem. That's where we kind of go, just to see how we can leverage it, leverage the technique. Many will appreciate, especially coaches out there. They know that they'll give a session, they'll give a standard session to 5 athletes in their group. And they know that not all 5 athletes will respond the same. So we're all very, very unique in our response to the same. Even if they're of similar ability, they'll still have a different training response. This is kind of the cool thing where the tools of artificial intelligence or machine learning can start to learn about your own sort of, fingerprint, or sort of, for lack of a better term, but your own kind of unique response. And they can help to kind of continue to cater and optimize subsequent programming as a result. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. As a student of the exercise sciences at university, alongside my physio studies, one of the big themes that emerged pretty quickly was that there are responders and non-responders, and no one is going to respond the same to the same stimulus. So I guess what I'm picking up is technology such as Athletica can help make decisions around coming back to that golden question: what training should the athlete do that day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. So Athletica or machine learning and whatnot it's exactly that. It starts to know you. It starts to know your typical response to the session. I love this comment that one of my athletes gave me the other day. He's like, yeah, Athletica's, I think it's really gotten to know me. Like, in other words, so he's used to these regular training prescriptions that Athletica is feeding him up, and they're, it's built on my own coaching. So, if you're using Athletica, you're getting my sessions. But now they're being tweaked and curbed, and Athletica is doing that because good coaches do this, no question. But when we get busy, you miss things from time to time, right? You're not always there on the ground, and this is where we can leverage machines to be there a little bit more often, because they don't get tired. Yeah. Brett's his name. And Brett's just, he's like, yeah, Athletica it's really got me. It's really getting the prescription right on any kind of given day. So it's curbing the load response. When I say load, I'm saying, how many reps or sets, the duration of the prescription, et cetera, right? So it's kind of cool.
It's very cool. Leveraging machines to be there more often. So it's not talking about necessarily replacing coaches. It's talking about going further with the ability to come back to that golden question. What training should the athlete make decisions around? What training should the athlete do that day?
Yeah. And that's a really important point to put out there, because when we first started building Athletica, we had to just build an athlete version, right? So it was just for athletes. It wasn't available for coaches. But the end goal was always to include coaches. We just had to do something. We had to build something first with the athletes in mind to learn, to be able to, build an infrastructure that was going to be, giving reliable results. And so now we've done that, and now, very timely, we're just in the process now of launching our coach version, because and now coaches can use this alongside. So coaches can use this tool to ultimately be that extra set of eyes on their athletes, because how are coaches able to be there all the time? It's just there's just so many inputs, right, for every single athlete. So if we want to be, if you're coaching one or maybe 5 athletes, you've really got a good handle on them. But then you start going to 10, start going to 15, start going to 40. Well, there's just too many touch points. So no human mind can keep up with everyone's individual little context and small tweak that they need on any given day. But the machine does know. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So,
and we want to explore, if we can, Paul, the difference between the coach version, which is about to be released, and there's a great blog which I've had a little bit of a pre-look at that's soon to be released, that sort of explores some of the principles that the technology leverages. So let's look at the difference between the athlete version and the coach version. But just before we jump into that, it's a pretty nice, cool story about how this even emerged for you. Can you just share a little bit about the background to actually even get to this point? It's a good story.
Well, I mean, are you referring to like the HIIT science and stuff, or?
Well, I mean, I think the endurance world knows you for HIIT science. It would be interesting to hear a little bit about the story behind that. But then I believe it was one of the listeners of a podcast that you were on that reached out to you after listening to you talk about artificial intelligence being involved in coaching maybe circa 2015, 16. And they actually reached out and said, well, I'm a computer scientist. I think this can be done.
Yep. A lot of stories. So now I know which one you mean. So actually. And a lot of your listeners will know Dan Plews, right? So Dan Plews and I, Plews and Prof, we were, having a chat about this whole thing. And it was Stephen Brown from New Zealand. He reached out when Dan and I were talking about this whole thing back in 2015. People were starting to talk about, I wonder if we could use computers to do this thing. Yeah. Stephen Brown reached out and said, hey, let's do it. So we went forward and really started putting the pieces in place to be able to do this. 8 years of infrastructure, 8 years of building. It's not an easy task. No, I can tell you that much for free. A lot of pain along the way. Only now are we, starting to reap some of the benefits. And then HIIT science kind of came to the mix as well, right? So then that really, we needed to really have a solid foundation of what the concepts were that we were going to leverage in Athletica, right? So that had to be really rock solid. So, we were going to use, really expert plans as a foundation. Those are inbuilt and in there. And then, then we do classic Bannister load response stuff. And this is stuff that's in sports science that, and you'll see it, those of you using Training Peaks, for example, or many of the other platforms, you'll see the performance management system that's in the back end, and they leverage the, Bannister's fitness and fatigue modeling there as well. So, and it's the general principle or premise is that, you don't want to do too much too soon. You want to build fitness and build and gain freshness. And you want to do it progressively so that you don't get injured. So Athletica has that all built in, and that's how it's manipulating the load within it. And then the stuff we spoke about before with the load response, because everyone's a little bit different. Well, you feed back to your coach at the end, and Athletica reads your comments. Not every coach has time to read every single comment that people write. Athletica does have the time. It does it immediately. It reads those comments. It takes count of them. And then your rating perceived exertion, RPE, and as well as the feel. Like a session can be hard, but it can feel great. Like a session can be hard and can feel really awful. They mean totally different things, right? And again, if you're filling in the feedback correctly then it gets that load response too, and it tweaks accordingly. So those are just some of the things that are just working in the back end to be a fantastic assistant coach or assistant coach for your athletes to give you the best response to that session.
So coach or assistant coach. Paul, you mentioned Training Peaks there, obviously so widely well known and used amongst the endurance community. I guess an obvious question that people may have as they listen in or as they get exposed to Athletica or Athletica as an example would be, well, what's the difference? I know you've just shared a little bit. There's a bit more, I guess, back-end manipulation of the load response, etc. By the sounds of it. But yeah, how would you sort of, in simple terms, describe the difference between a Training Peaks platform and an Athletica platform for an athlete?
Yep. So, Training Peaks, full respect, and they are the gold standard, and they're beautiful. And I'm just on the point now where I no longer use my Training Peaks account. So they're the trailblazers in all of this stuff. But all you're going to get on that is a static plan, although it can be dynamically adjusted by a good coach, no question. And you get a nice, session builder and these sorts of things. So these are, some beautiful front end work that's in that. You get some calculations of the loads as well. But everything's got to be done at the end to make a change to that program, to make it dynamic. You need a human coach that's very with it. Now, a lot of those coaches, as you know, they cost a lot of money, right? So solid coach can go from, $400 to $1,000 or more, right? Like a Dan Plews is, you're talking $1,000 US, et cetera, right? So that's the, that you get that ultimately. You get all of the same sort of things in Athletica, but you get it for much better price. But Athletica is a moving, dynamic plan. They're taking into account all of the HIIT science principles along the way, and they're so they're throwing you the template plans, and they're making the adjustments to that. Everything is shiftable and movable. They're listening to your comments, and all that stuff just it can't exist in Training Peaks. It just doesn't.
So the data that Athletica is assessing and analysing is a combination, if I'm hearing correctly, Paul, of subjective data, the rating of perceived exertion of a session and any comments, combined with obviously objective data. What are say the minimum levels of objective data input? What are the things or the minimum levels and the ideal levels of data that Athletica would need? So is the minimum heart rate, is the ideal gold standard to have heart rate power? What are the inputs that the system likes?
We leverage both Garmin platforms and Strava platforms, so which encompasses ultimately 99% of the market. So just about anyone can rock up, and you can have the minimal, I guess, can be movement, speed of movement. So just like just your actual pace. So that would be like the minimal. And then you could, ideally you've got heart rate on there as well. Ideally you have power on there. Ideally you have, a GPS location, movement. But yeah, so many of us now are not doing these things without a good wearable watch. But if you've got a decent wearable watch, as most of us have, then you can play. You can rock up and be on Athletica. Ideally, power on your bike is fantastic, but it can work without it as well.
Okay, so that's minimum standards. A decent watch to be able to play, as you say, Paul. The systems, or the technology is essentially built on the HIIT science principles from your such well-established publication alongside your colleague Martin Buchheit, HIIT Science. What are these principles? And let's maybe just explore them, because not everyone will have read that meaty publication.
I know. Super geek, man. 30 years. Yeah. Anyways, So what is the Coles Notes version is ultimately, so we try to take a physiological based approach to our training. So you can do sessions lots of different ways, but there's three physiological targets that you're going to get out of any given training session, right? You're going to be like an aerobic target. You can have an anaerobic target, and you can have a neuromuscular target. And there's lots of different ways to get at those. So I guess the general HIIT science principles is we show people how to move the levers of training, right? Your intensity, the duration of the work bout, the intensity and recovery of the work bout, the number of repetitions, and on it kind of goes. It gets rather complicated, right? And this is where machines can kind of come in. And so this is where we knew. So we're teaching all of this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's super complicated, right? If you're just rocking up for the first time to learn this stuff, you're just like, your mind's blown. This is where, machines they're sweet with it. They're cool. They're like, yeah, we can crunch all that. Not a problem. So you do the hard yards and you put everything sort of in there. And now we've got everything kind of covered. So they can work out how much of an aerobic load that session was, how much of an anaerobic load that was, how much of a neuromuscular load it is. And when we're talking neuromuscular, think about the muscle soreness or the muscle recruitment action, and think about how these different sessions elicit these different neuromuscular sort of responses. So yeah, those are being built in into the back end as well. And this is where, so the prescription is physiologically based. So it's you're going after a certain amount of load. Yeah, it's kind of working almost in sort of a reverse order, where most of the coaches out there, they'll know that they're working more on we're going to do VO2 max intervals on Tuesday, or we're going to do strength endurance on Wednesday, whatever, you know what I mean? Like you're going on more of a template plan with that. Whereas we're kind of working in reverse, and we're saying, you need this much load in your system to elicit this response to get, to work towards the race. We're again trying to answer that question. What's the best session to do to give us the best outcome on race day?
I'm thinking feed forward versus feed back, or a combination.
You got it. Yeah. And, a lot of the coaches are saying, wow, come on, that's not going to work. Context rules. We agree. So context always trumps any of the best practice here. And this is why the coach version is so important. Coaches need to be working with their athletes to flip and move sessions around. This is the cool thing this is why we needed to build the athlete session version first, was so that it can be completely customizable, and you click and drag and move those sessions in accordance with your certain context. That's got to happen, right? Like if life gets in the way, your kids get sick and stuff, and you got to go right now, man, and you can't do your session, then that's fine. And then Athletica has to adapt and adjust accordingly. But again, no problem for a machine. We just have a blank day on that, and we'll catch up tomorrow. Click and drag your session over to the next day, and everything gets rerouted. So it's like sat nav. This is a lot of people are using this analogy. They're doing our people that are on the platform. They're saying this is just like sat nav. It's just like it's rerouting me out. It's so cool. So yeah, that's exactly how it's working.
Everyone appreciates sat nav these days, and it's a nice, I think, analogy to draw there. It's like sat nav for your coaching for your training prescription.
It is for both athletes and coaches too, so they can both have that.
Sat nav for both the athlete and the coach.
Yeah.
You mentioned one of the principles there, that this technology is built on context before content. The second principle is structure and framework first. You've now launched the Training Science podcast, which I encourage anyone that's interested to get across. What's the takeaway here with this principle, structure and framework first? What do you mean by that?
Well, yeah, it's a good one because, a lot of times we'll have coaches will know this and athletes will know this. There's this golden fancy workout, right, that you can do, and that's the money session, and it's never going to be a simple money session that's going to win your race on game day. It's like you've got to have the overall template, or the structure needs to be kind of solid first. And this was, again, in the Training Science podcast. This is just in our first 20 episodes. We're new relative to you, but it's like we've got outstanding world-class practitioners from just about every single sport that are coming on. And that was just one of the similarities. That was didn't matter the sport, but they're coming in and they were just, when you ask them what was their secret, well, that was one of the key things that they're seeing. And that was whether they're conditioners themselves or working with world-renowned coaches in some of the top teams or top athletes out there. It was the key structure had to be there. Olaf, I interviewed him as well the other day. We all know Olaf, and I know you had him on your podcast as well. Excellent episode. And he was saying sort of the same thing. He was saying that 80% of the sessions for all of his athletes, they are the same. They're the same. It's the 20% where we need to fine tune and tweak. And that's where the individualization really kind of comes in. So we have the 80% is built in ultimately. Yeah. And then, the fine tuning happens as Athletica learns ultimately.
The sat nav kicks in.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, one of the other principles is getting the load or stress right. And as you know, more than anyone, I guess, it's not easy to get the load right. As you just said, it takes these real-time ideal changes to still, let's not lose sight of the fact that we're trying to answer this question: what training should the athlete do today? So getting the load right, you've made the analogy, we've made the analogy, it's like a sat nav. What things do you want to share with the athlete that maybe has room to improve day-to-day decision-making that perhaps isn't at the moment around, not necessarily jumping on Athletica, but what tips would you share with them around trying to get the load right? Like, another way of asking this, Paul, would be, what mistakes do you see athletes commonly making?
Just doing the session that's in front of them because the session says to do that in front of them. So it doesn't matter if you're Athletica, Training Peaks, guru, coach, whoever, you got to learn the whole process of listening. And does that session actually make sense? You got to feel that session. You should try to feel that session before you do it. And then you need to feel that session whilst you're out there as well. And your feel always trumps the session prescription. So that is really important principle. And if you master that concept within you, you will, you're definitely doing yourself a service on preventing yourself from getting injured. And continuing to, again, one of the key principles that will lead us to Rome, leads the best road to Rome, is the principle of consistency. So if we can, the consistency wins every day of the week, and twice on Sundays. And Alistair said this. Alistair Brownlee was on our Training Science podcast, said the same thing. For whatever reason, he was very good at just protecting his health. Ironically, he got, it didn't happen for sub 7, but it's like for the success of his career, successful times of his career, that was really one of the key things, right? Like it was just, he was always kind of consistent with his training day in, day out, because, and that makes sense even cellularly as well, because you get this consistent cell signaling that amplifies many of the aerobic adaptations that we want as endurance athletes. So if you've got that little man or woman in your head and they're good at listening to that session and that feel for that session, man, you're going to be you've got something really special that's going to take you to the next level.
Yeah, it's powerful. Feel the training session, feel it, not just follow the prescription blindly. Why do you think it is? I mean, I think we probably can all identify with this. Why do you think it is that athletes do sometimes just in rabbit ears here, blindly follow the session versus feel the session?
Well, yeah, I think it's really kind of stems from maybe I don't want to put any businesses down, but there's this whole no pain, no gain philosophy that's prevalent throughout sport, right? So miles win medals is another one, but it's just like more is better. And it's like, if I do more, it must be better. And I fell into that trap myself. And, but it's just, I think that is why. So it's like, if it's on paper, that must be what I have to do to get to, to get to success on game day. And maybe if I even do a little bit more, that would be better still. So it's just it's just a prevalent mindset that is within our society, but it's not a positive one. And this is one of the things, I think this is one of the reasons why Athletica has such success, is because it's a little bit lighter on the load than, sometimes doing less is doing more, and it permits more recovery. Yeah, at least more than people thought in the past. I can't tell you the number of times where people have just said that, oh yeah, the coach that I had before, they were just always just hammering me and I never wanted to miss a session. I always felt guilty about missing a session. And I never knew what to do after as well, if I did miss a session. And again, this is where with Athletica, it's kind of got your back as well, because it sat nav reroutes and you don't have to ever feel guilty about that. You just, click back on, get going again. And same for the coach too. They don't have to have the whip down on their athletes anymore as well with this. They can just chill back a little bit as well and be a little bit more nurturing, which I think is a good thing to do. Listen and, allow the whole process to just kind of happen a little bit more.
Gosh, so interesting. I think the further you go up the performance ladder towards high performance, the more you inevitably do find coaches, athletes feeling the session, listening to the session, listening to their body's response during it. I know Joel Filiol, Australian triathlon coach, who is very careful to talk about hard. I think it's hard, easy. He uses these words, and it kind of mirrors with an adage that Stephen Seiler recently shared on the show, and that is, hard is what you're good for that day. It's not always about hitting that prescription of the watts for the bike intervals. It's about what have you got on that day. And I think there's a real liberation for an athlete, and perhaps a long way to go for recreationally competitive athletes and recreational athletes in letting go sometimes of those hard and fast targets. Is that an extension of what you're sharing there, Paul? Yeah,
100%. And both of those guys are pretty wise and have huge respect for both of them. And yeah, that's, I think you nailed it with those, listen to those guys, but yeah, feel trumps, anything that's on paper. And feel's going to vary on the day, depending on so many different things, but develop that intuition, and be patient with yourself and kind to yourself. If it's not, if you're not hitting it out of the park every single day, because you're not going to, right? And the better you can become at peace with not hitting it out of the park on every given day, the stronger you're going to be in the end. You're going to be able to just park it, recover, onto tomorrow's session.
Gosh, so powerful. Be patient and be kind to yourself. That's been coming up, re-emerging as a theme as well on this show, and I think that the personalities that endurance sporting riggers attract can be obviously hard driving, driven, disciplined, and I think being kind to ourselves sometimes is an acquired skill. Unfortunately, through bouts of illness and injury, that many athletes mature into. I'm still trying to learn the skill, Paul, but hey, we're works in progress, right?
Yeah, likewise too, right? Yeah, I'm not going to say I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
You're listening to the Physical Performance Show, episode 329, an expert edition with Paul Laursen, PhD, co-founder of Athletica and HIIT Science. Support for today's show comes from Polar. Polar recently launched 2 stunning new generation running watches, the Polar Pacer and the Polar Pacer Pro. Both watches offer an incomparable running experience with powerful training and recovery features that help runners understand their body and know when they're doing too much or not enough to reach their goals. Engineered specifically for running, the Polar Pacer and the Polar Pacer Pro are equipped with a variety of functions unique to Polar and provide personalized guidance and support across the entire runner's journey, from the first steps to the marathon and beyond. The Polar Pacer Pro, it's for those who want to run better. It's one of the most powerful and sophisticated running watches ever built. It's ultra-light with a high-performance core processor, including an extensive suite of training tools that will help serious runners improve their performance. With built-in navigation and running power, it debuts at an incredible $499. Meanwhile, the Polar Pacer, that's the watch for those who want to fall in love with running. It's an ideal running watch for those who are starting their journey in the running world, embodying the simplicity of running with all the essentials. It's the ideal tool to fall in love with the sport. The Polar Pacer helps all runners get started at just $299. So if you feel like it's time to beat your best, jump across to Shop Polar over at polar.com to check out their all-new Polar Pacer range. For now, let's jump back with this week's featured guest, Paul Laursen, exploring artificial intelligence in coaching, co-founder of HIIT Science and Athletica. You mentioned Alistair Brownlee there, who the endurance world looked on with equal disappointment for Alistair in his inability to take to the sub-7 project just completed, which was in essence largely his baby. But a fact that a lot of people may not know is that Alistair Brownlee is one of the investors in the Athletica program, which I think, if you want to add credibility in the endurance space, particularly the triathlon space, it's not a bad name to have behind you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're so honored to have him, as part of our team, and he's obviously just so inspirational in terms of what he's still continuing to do. And yeah, that was his brainchild, was that sub-7, and it broke everyone's heart to see him not able to kind of complete that. But again, just so much respect for the guy for his inspiration and striving to try and do that. And he enabled 2 others to do it too, right? Or 4 others to do it, 2 men and 2 women. So it's just absolutely phenomenal to have Alistair on board. And he's he runs a lot of people don't know, but he's also into, like, the guy is so intelligent. Honestly, I can't speak highly enough about him. So he's done part of a medical degree before his coach pulled him back and said, no, you're going to do Olympics first. So he went and did that. But then he also went and did business finance degrees too, right? So he's into investment, and he's really leading the business end of things for us as well, and introducing us to certain people that we need to have to kind of make it happen. So yeah, it's just again another amazing member of our outstanding team with Athletica. We
featured Alistair last year as a featured performer episode, and those that hadn't heard a lot from him, I think, quickly realized that he is a real thinker and a real researcher and an athletic academic. You can't pull him apart. He mentioned that he was studying principles of training whilst in some ways forging this idea of polarized training approach in the triathlon, ITU world, the Olympic distance racing scene, when for many years, you certainly remember the 80s and 90s, it was about intensity of sessions, backing up day after day after day. And I think there's a lot of commentary around that after we featured Alistair, Paul, around the fact that, wow, he's a real thinker.
So you mentioned the textbook that we wrote with HIIT Science. Well, that's how we kind of got introduced. So there was a strength and conditioner at I think it was Leeds, where he was working out, and who had our book. And because he knew Alistair was so, could handle it, he basically handed him the book and said, read this. He said, okay, I will. And he did. And then we got in touch, right? And then when he realized that, that was kind of being built into the back end, he was like, oh yeah, I want some skin in the game on that. So yeah, it was pretty cool. He came on board. So
yeah, wow, what a great story. Paul, you've mentioned some mistakes people make in not feeling the session, but just following the training prescription in itself without questioning it. If you had to give your top 3 tips for athletes, it's a tough question because obviously there's so many ways you could take this to maximize their performance, what would be Prof. Paul Laursen's top 3 tips for the athlete?
Well, I think we probably dealt with all of them on the podcast, mate. I think it would be consistent training, learn the feel of training. And number 3 be kind.
Be kind and patient. Consistent training, number 1. Number 2, learn to feel the session. And number 3, be kind and patient, which I think is quite a juxtaposition for an academic, a coach, technology entrepreneur, if you like. They're pretty basic concepts, aren't they?
Well, they are. And this is really, like, if there's one thing that people can take home from this podcast, we really haven't touched too much on AI. AI and technology is it's the leverage aspect, but it really all comes back to the human aspect at the end of the day, whether you're athlete or coach. And it's all about us as humans. And we are only just a bridge of, technology is leveraging the human aspect. We're not taking over.
What is the definition of artificial intelligence? I'm not putting you on the spot. I don't expect a textbook answer. I haven't looked this up, Paul. I haven't looked this up. But what's your definition?
There's probably lots of different forms. Like even the computer or a calculator has some form of artificial intelligence at a very basic level. But it's like you ultimately have these these different areas of leveraging that kind of come into play where machines take over and help us, and they advance us. So, and it's done in an artificial way where it's not brain neural networks, it's machine neural networks that are able to give us a leg up. And that's what we've been very good at building as humans throughout our lives. There's a great blog I know that one of our workers, Andrea Zagnoli, wrote on kind of how it's very similar to the car, the self-driving car. And there's just, there's all these different, even the car itself would have been a first advancement of it. And now you've got self-driving cars, right? And it's it's a very similar sort of progression that we're going through as an industry too, right? Where, we talked with Polly Kubru at the beginning of the podcast, where we were just talking about, we had the heart rate monitor that was just helping to guide us and give us a little bit more information. But now we're moving into things like Athletica, where we're actually giving, insight into all these various different aspects of human physiology and how we might be better sort of tomorrow. So there's a progression of this intelligence, and they add artificial or augmented AI to as these sort of buzzwords. But it's at the end of the day, it's just a new tool that's sitting in front of us.
Yeah, it's definitely nothing to be afraid of or pushing back on. It's just, as you say, a natural evolution. I just simply thought of when we go on to Amazon or we go to a regular commerce store that we may engage in, they are via AI recommending other books that may interest us. So Spotify. These are already exposures that we have to it without necessarily recognizing that as artificial intelligence, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and it's this is the crazy thing is just, I guess, how it slowly becomes permeated through everything that you do. And these are all means of artificial intelligence that you've brought up. And slowly, we just don't even really realize it's happening. But we're no different in our industry either.
Paul, you've shared your top 3 tips for athletes. What are your top 3 tips or principles for coaches to help optimize their athletes' performance and well-being?
Yeah, that's a good one. For me, I really think listening is key. Being flexible and a willingness to continue to learn. That's would be the key ones.
Listening, being flexible, and a willingness to continue to learn.
Yeah, like an openness too, right? Like I think I know I've seen many coaches where they just seem to be very set in their ways. And I don't think that that's a good thing for you've got it. You've definitely, there's time and place where you need to be strong and firm if it's in the best interest, but you also need to be, there's also a lot of times too, where we'd be better to just kind of sit back and think about things a little bit. And
these are the soft principles. They're not so soft, but they're the key principles that we all like the data. We all like to look at the numbers and the physiology, but this is still underpinned by real humans and real human principles of engagement, interaction, right? Listening to your athlete, being kind, holding them to account when necessary. It's just relationship building. Yeah, for sure. And it came back to me, but it's like so many of us are, as coaches, we can be set in our ways. And if we can just be a little bit, when we're too set in our ways, we can't grow as coaches. So I think a willingness to consider new things and continue to learn is just a really good trait of a good coach. Willingness to continue to learn. Paul, you've been very generous with your time today, and this is not an advertisement for Athletica. This is an exploration of artificial intelligence in coaching. We're using Athletica as the example to obviously bring this to life. Where, if you fast forward 10 years from now, we're recording this in 2022, what would you like the endurance sporting coaching landscape to look like, or what do you think it may look like 10 years from now?
Yeah, that's a great one. And that's where, as a business, we're really trying to think about that a lot. And I truly think that you're going to see more and more of these types of businesses, whether it's Athletica or others that are out there. But, you're going to see more coaches going more towards really recognizing that they need to use these assistant coaches that are out there because they give a better product, they give a better service, and that they can't keep up. And athletes, they're going to expect that type of a service, right? They'll need to be listened to. So I think you're just going to see a lot more of those. I think you're going to see wearables proliferate, and you're going to see an increased number of the ability for these artificial intelligence platforms like Athletica to accept and understand and interpret what that actually kind of means. Things like heart rate variability. Think of, the Dexcoms or the Super Sapiens and blood glucose, blood lactates. These are all going to be happening in the next 5 to 10 years. It's already happening so quickly. I guess I would just encourage people, don't be afraid. I would say, how can you leverage this in a positive way? Because we're still all needed on the, when you're towing the line or when you're at Kona at the start line and whatnot, you're there as a human. You're not there as a robot's not there doing these sorts of things. It's you.
Yeah, well, it's a great reminder. I had a conversation in the physiotherapy room yesterday, Paul, with a patient about Google medicine and about people Googling medical conditions, diagnoses, etc. And he's in the finance world. And my response to his question around it was, I think it's a great thing. It elevates the general awareness and the knowledge of the consumer, the non-trained professional, which you better be on your game as a health professional. Because there is likely going to be a time when someone's more informed about a condition than you are. And I think that's a good thing. All ships rise on the same tide. So my view, looking from the outside in at something like this permeation of and progression of artificial intelligence in coaching is perhaps it'll have the same effect. Everyone's level lifts because it just has to.
I agree. I think that's exactly how it's going to happen. I think it's going to be the athletes who are saying, look, coach, I'm using this Athletica program and it's giving me more info or whatever, name your AI kind of program, this platform. It's helping me and I need you to use this.
Paul, every guest of the show gets issued 2 set questions. Here they come. The first, which is
I don't know these.
which is you've already touched on in some ways with your top 3 tips for performance optimization for coaches and your top 3 tips for athletics, for athlete performance, for the athletes themselves. And that's this one piece of advice to help listeners perform at their best. This is meant to be tough. You can boil everything you've learned through your academic, extensive career, well-touted career, your coaching success, your exploration of technology into one piece of advice. What would that one piece of advice be?
Learn how to calm down before bed and get a good night's sleep.
Learn how to calm down before bed and get a good night's sleep.
Yeah. So it's just as one example, I've really picked up, yoga is really helping me. I'm just into this 20-minute yoga session before I go to sleep, and it's setting me up real nice. I'm doing some other stuff, some breathing technique as well, but the combo of the two just really, puts me at a regular routine and time, puts me down to sleep. I get a good night's sleep, man, I'm ready to kill it the next day. And then that just goes from everything, from adaptation to everything. And Alistair echoed that as well. He goes, recovery is 90% sleep, 9% nutrition, 1% everything else. And it's just like sleep's where it's at.
Yeah, gosh, he was putting himself to sleep reading the HIIT science textbook, perhaps.
It does that to you, bro.
Oh, gosh. And then, Paul, every guest of the show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. So what is Professor Paul Laursen's physical challenge going to be?
Give me, everyone, a short interval program, a short HIIT science interval program. Give me 3 by 8 minutes, or 3 by 8, 30-30s.
So
30 hard, yep. 30 easy, and with 5 minutes recovery. It's a good set.
What are we going to call that?
Call it the HIIT science class. Call it the Athletica Classic short interval.
The Athletica Classic short interval. Brilliant. So if you take that on, do let Paul know. You can find Paul easily over on all the socials. Paul B. Laursen over on Twitter. Athletica is everywhere to be found as well. But where would you like people to go to find out more, Paul, engage with yourself or your team around any questions they may have?
So Athletica AI on the socials, and HIIT Science are the big ones. So at HIIT Science, those are the big two. And yeah, you can ping me. You can email me through my my website, paullarsen.com, or ping me on the Twitter as well, Paul B. Larsen.
Paul, thank you very much for stopping by, sharing your expertise, and bringing to light this concept of AI in coaching in the endurance sporting world, a principle that is it's going to smack a few people in the face, but that's okay. It's okay to get smacked in the face because it's like, I needed that smack in the face. Hey, thank you so much for having me on. Honestly, yeah, you've got an amazing audience, and it's a real honor to be on your podcast. So thank you so much. Thanks again, Paul. You're absolutely brilliant, and we wish you all the best for the decade ahead. Watch this space. Sounds good, dude. So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show. And I trust and I know that you enjoyed Paul's sharings today. Now, if you did, then jump over and follow Paul and the team over at Athletica, over on all the socials. And also whilst there, check out HIIT Science, HIIT Science. Both wonderful channels to stay abreast of. Now, we've also linked up in the show notes a wonderful blog looking at how Athletica, the coach's version, recently launched, leverages the HIIT Science training principles. You'll find that over at physicalperformanceshow.com. Whilst there, consider supporting the show by becoming a patron of the show. You can support the show from just $5 per month, and in return receive complimentary access to our back catalogue of live stream events, including Dr. Shona Halson, recovery specialist and scientist, Dr. Stephen Seiler, forefather of polarized training, and Rinny McGregor, acclaimed sports dietitian. And at the time of this episode release, we are just weeks away from announcing our next upcoming live stream event. But hot tip, it will involve performance psychology. A massive thanks to those who have become patrons of the show for your practical support. Thank you also to the wonderful team who put this show together each and every week. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin, show administration, Matthew Olding, show graphic design, and Milan Boro, videography. Jump over to our YouTube channel. There you can find the video episodes and video snippets of each week's release. And lastly, don't forget to keep the podsies coming. That's a screenshot of the episode that you've been enjoying and tag in the show at Physical Performance Show and we will repost those. They are always so much fun to see coming through. If you have any feedback for the show, you can find me over on the socials at Brud_beer, or perhaps you have an upcoming guest recommendation. Lastly, if you are an endurance athlete struggling with bone, tendon, or joint-related concerns, Pogo Physio's online telehealth consultations with myself or any of the Pogo Physio team can be an ideal platform to help get you back to your physical best. Jump over to pogophysio.com.au/telehealth. Now, coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, you are in for a real treat with in-form Ironman triathlon silver medalist from the recent World Championships in St. George and sub-8 conqueror British-based Kat Matthews. Kat joins us next week to share her highs, lows, and learnings. So until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.